聞こえてるんだろ。お土産もあるよ。
また綿用な帽子でも持ってきたのだろう。
木いちごのサンドイッチだよ。いや
The Laughing Cavalier here, presenting to you another tale of these troubled times. Today, I shall be doing a video I did not expect to be making, but sometimes even a cynic such as myself can be surprised. The topic of the video being Becoming Elizabeth, a production I had dismissed upon announcement, fearing it would be just as bad as all the other ones, but now, at least in terms of authenticity, I think it is actually shaping up to be quite good. Possibly, because of the awfulness that was the Anne Boleyn miniseries from Channel 5, I am merely trying to find good in something else to distract my mind. But, genuinely, I think, finally, the makers of a modern Tudor drama have actually done their research for once. I am still worried about the plot though, which is something we shall get into later. Firstly, a bit of backstory to this production. Back in late 2019, Starz Media announced that they would be commissioning a new 8-episode drama series looking at the early life of the future Queen Elizabeth I. Lead writer would be Anya Rice, with various others also attached to writing. Executive producers are Rice, George Faber, and George Ormond, with Justin Chadwick, who directed the other Boleyn Girl, being brought on as one of the 3 directors. Sources seem to suggest that they were getting ready to film in mid-2020, but then a certain event happened that you might be aware of. Then there was virtual silence until October of last year, when they finally announced that German actress Alicia von Rittberg had been cast as the young Elizabeth, with production set to start in December/January, and then radio silence again for many months. Fortunately, there were always the eagle-eyed photographers of the press, snapping pictures here and there, and giving us a few glimpses of what the production was looking like, along with various sleuths online posting information from actors' CVs, social media followings and so forth. This meant that we were able to gather some intel. I have done a few unscripted videos covering all of this, shown on screen, but they were based off the few fragments we had back then. In May of this year, however, we got an official cast announcement and a production teaser video, so now I feel confident in making this video, looking through all this and talking about the historical accuracy and so forth. Again, I'll be posting screenshots of the video with timestamps of the section I'm referring to. The link to the whole video will be in the description below. So the opening clip has Alicia von Rittberg herself introducing the video, and shows us a few shots of her in costume as Elizabeth. Now, I must admit, Alicia is probably one of the few in this production who doesn't quite physically match the real-life character they have been cast as. Historically, Elizabeth had a quite long face with dark eyes, much like her mother Anne Boleyn, whereas Alicia has blue eyes and a more round face. I do appreciate, however, that she has dyed her hair red for this role, since she is naturally blonde, so well done on that front. Overall though, eye colour and so on is a bit more minor compared to my main concern, that being her age. Alicia is currently 27, but Becoming Elizabeth starts in 1547 with the death of Henry VIII, at a time when Elizabeth was 13, and the series is going to be mainly focused on Edward's reign from what I can tell, Elizabeth being 19 when her brother died. Now, this isn't the first time we have faced this problem. Glenda Jackson played the same role in Elizabeth R back in 1971, and had to portray her entire life from about 1549 to 1603, which was tricky for the first episode in particular, since Glenda was 35 at the time. Now, a character who is 13 at the start and 19 at the end is a bit difficult to cast, since there's going to be a lot of growth in between, so I'm going to be a bit lenient, but I do still worry how her relationship with Thomas Seymour will play out. Speaking of Seymour, we get a few brief shots of him, played here by Tom Cullen. Overall, he's a pretty decent physical match for the real-life Seymour, although the historical one does appear to be a bit paler in his portraits and has a much longer beard, but I don't think it is too bad overall, and is a huge step up from, say, the Spanish Princess version of Henry VII, for example. A promotional image was released along with the casting announcement, and we see Seymour here with Elizabeth. Now, historically, Elizabeth was sent to live with Thomas Seymour and his new wife, Catherine Parr, the widow of Henry VIII, where, during this time, Seymour pursued Elizabeth, doing things that would be rather inappropriate, to put it mildly. This shot here, though, has me worried. So they seem to be lovingly gazing at each other, Elizabeth not wearing a hood and having her hair down, suggesting that they are alone in her private quarters or something. This is where Alicia's age comes into it, since the historical Elizabeth was between 13 and 15 when all this was going on, a young teenager being exploited by her more powerful guardian. I must admit, her relationship with Seymour is something that has not really been done properly in film up till now, the only one I can think of being Elizabeth R, but again, that was a little hampered by the age problem. I hope this series will go for more of that sort of Elizabeth R angle, but we'll have to see. We get a few shots of Tom Cullen and Echo Corty standing in front of various flags. As something of a vexillologist myself, this immediately intrigued me. In the first shot, we can see white banners with the red and white Tudor rose, the symbol of the dynasty. Then, there appears to be the banner of Aragon and Castile, the arms used by the kings of Spain in this period, the man holding this title in 1547 being Charles von Habsburg, who also held the title of Holy Roman Emperor, and we can also see his banner as emperor in this shot as well, being the yellow one with the black double-headed eagle. Finally, I can't be too sure, but I think I spy various banners displaying the royal arms of the Kingdom of Scotland, which are still used on the royal arms to this day. There is a light blue banner over here, but it is too far away for me to see what it is, I'm afraid. In the next shot, behind Echo, we can see a red banner with the cross of St. George and a white lion. Now this would appear to be the banner of Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, being similar to the one he used in Henry VIII's reign. By this time period, though, he had been technically stripped of his title, and was in the Tower, only being saved from the block by the timely death of Henry, so I don't know when his banner will come into it. However, he was restored to his duchy upon the accession of Mary I, and was sent out to crush Wyatt's rebellion the next year, at the ripe old age of 81, so it could be from this event. I can't quite see the other banner, but I can make out one half of it is blue with white stars, and the other half is white with what I think is a red heart and a crown atop. Although, again, I'm not too sure. Since this production is being filmed at the Bottle Yard Studios, the same place as Spanish Princess, I expect they have reused a fair few banners from that series as well, although thankfully not the costumes. Here on screen is Oliver Zetterstrom, who plays Edward VI, and here we see a good example of why I was actually quite pleased when I saw this video. Here, we see him in a black and gold outfit, with a chain of office around him, and I think a baton of some sort in his hand. This is almost directly lifted from this portrait of the king painted in around 1550, attributed to William Scrots. Edward was about 13 at the time, and so is Oliver as well. So I'm glad that they've actually got someone the right age to play a character, and not a 25-year-old to play a 10-year-old or something. I must say, he doesn't quite look like Edward, who had red hair like his siblings, whilst Oliver is blonde, but he's not too far off, and, to be fair, his siblings in this will have red hair, so 2 out of the 3 isn't bad. We will see how he does in the role when the series releases. There are some shots here of a small entourage of mounted men-at-arms protecting a carriage bearing the royal arms of England. Now, historically, the king had 2 main bodyguard units during this time period, both of which still exist to this day. The Yeoman of the Guard was the oldest, a unit founded by King Henry VII after his victory at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, who were usually on foot and armed with halberds, and not usually exceeding 100 in number, the only exception being in 1513, when Henry VIII took them with him on campaign to France, briefly expanded the corps to 500 foot and 200 mounted archers. By Edward's reign, they were usually wearing red and black tunics bearing the royal cipher, and wore soft caps, being the men who would walk alongside the king at his coronation, much like they have done in centuries since. The second unit was the Gentlemen Pensioners. Today, they are called the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen at Arms, and wear red coats with Dragoon Guard helmets and halberds. In Edward's reign, though, they usually wore black and red, still being armed with halberds, but would often ride and act as the king's mounted escort. They had initially been raised by King Henry VIII, again for the 1513 campaign, being a company of heavily armoured knights and men-at-arms drawn from the younger members of the aristocracy and nobility. But they were disbanded sometime after the campaign. Henry reformed them again, though, in 1539. This time, though, they would be made up of more experienced gentlemen. Officially, there are about 60 of these men, but no more than 30 were on duty at any one time. I think the unit we see here is a mixture of the two, since they have the red tunics of the yeomen, but ride like pensioners. Although in some other behind-the-scenes stuff posted by members of the public and the press, there are also some men in black tunics escorting Mary and possibly Elizabeth in some scenes, who probably would be the pensioners, unless they are meant to be their own personal retinues. In some other pictures, we can also see the yeoman unit with halberds and on foot, so that part will be accurate, but I do question the sheer amount of armour they are wearing. Remember, these men were not usually so heavily armed, especially at more formal occasions in peacetime, like a coronation. My guess is that they will be doubling up as generic soldiers when we come to the battle scenes, and that the armour is hiding the lack of ciphers and livery, which is a shame since the mid-Tudor army was one of the most colourful forces in English history, and it would have been great to see them on screen. Still, the characters look pretty good from what I can see. At least they didn't get some Victorian-looking one like the Tudors did. There is a very brief shot here of a scene being filmed in the snow, with what I think is Thomas Seymour about to board a carriage, saying farewell to Elizabeth. Again, not sure of the context of this scene, but I imagine it will be fairly early on in the story, since Thomas Seymour was executed in 1549. This then leads us on to a shot of Catherine Parr, played by Jessica Raine, and in the later part of the trailer, we get a wider shot, which appears to be a meeting of the King's Privy Council, with Edward at the head, and Elizabeth being brought in later to talk with the King. Now, Catherine wasn't attending Privy Council meetings during Edward's reign, obviously, but I expect this will be some sort of scene where she interrupts to ask something important, and Elizabeth is brought in for some official reason, perhaps. So you're doing better than the White Princess, at least. At the council meeting, we can see John Heffernan as the Duke of Somerset, Jamie Parker as John Dudley, the then Earl of Warwick, and Thomas Seymour, who was Lord Admiral, near Catherine. All three of these men were, of course, on the council at this time, with Somerset being the Lord Protector, the regent in the King's stead. It will be interesting to see how he is portrayed in this series since, up until the 20th century, he was often portrayed as the Good Duke, particularly by the more romantically minded Victorians who often overlooked the failings of his leadership, particularly the rebellions, the economic collapse, and the failed foreign policy of his 2 years as Protector. Meanwhile, Warwick, later Duke of Northumberland and Somerset's successor in all but name, was cast as the evil villain of the era, mainly due to his involvement in trying to put Lady Jane Grey on the throne and partly causing her death. An article by Deadline has some character blurbs, and these are the ones that cover Somerset and Warwick. John Heffernan plays the Duke of Somerset. Quick off the block, no pun intended I assume. When the old king dies, Somerset loses no time in claiming the position of Lord Protector for himself. He is to all intents and purposes the de facto monarch during Edward's childhood and teenage years. Humourless and ruthless, he is the opposite of his younger brother Thomas. Jamie Parker is John Dudley, Somerset's right-hand man on the Privy Council, his fixer and enforcer and oldest friend. A family man, seemingly the friendly face of the pair, but then a darker side begins to emerge. With Warwick, it will be interesting to see what they mean by a darker side emerges, probably referring to the eventual execution of Somerset in 1552, for which Warwick was blamed, and yet again demonised by the Victorians, with his achievements, such as his attempts to fix the economy, ending the expensive and fruitless foreign events of the 1540s, and other reforms generally being forgotten up until recent years. I must say, the set looks pretty nice as well. We have a lot of Tudor roses engraved above the fireplace and at the top of the wall, with wood panelling surrounding it. It looks very authentic, and I am glad we're not just going to get a bunch of churches and cathedrals representing palaces, although, sadly, there are one or two shots that show this might be a thing. But if I get some of my wood panelling and Tudor roses, I'll be a happy bunny.
うささま、どうぞ。はい、もみもみ。お熱くないですか？いかがでしたか？
Here, we have some severed heads affixed onto spikes, although I'm going to blur them just in case YouTube decides that the pictures are not suitable for their site, since I don't want to get my channel deleted. Now, placing the head of a traitor on a spike was a common practice in Tudor England, for men who had suffered the unfortunate fate of being executed. The only time this happened to a woman was Elizabeth Barton, who was hanged and posthumously beheaded for opposing Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn. Usually, though, the heads of traitors would be affixed above London Bridge, where they were up high and could be seen by anyone entering or leaving, a firm warning to those who would dare commit treason against the king. They were often preserved as well, and some could remain there for many years. They were a bit low down here for some reason, and could easily be stolen by some people sympathetic to them, but it is a minor point in the grand scheme of things. The heads could be of anyone, but my guess would be that there are men either executed following the rebellions of 1549, or those killed after Wyatt's rebellion in 1554, depending on whether we get that far into the series. Skipping forward a bit, we see a brief shot of Romola Garai in costume as the Lady Mary, future Mary I, and the older half-sister of Edward and Elizabeth. Historically, Mary was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and clung onto her Catholic faith at a time when the Protestant Edward was fully embracing the Reformation. According to the character summaries released with the announcement, Mary is described as follows. Mary is equally devoted to her God and her little brother the king, and it cleaves her in two that her twin devotions are entirely incompatible, for if she honours one, she dishonours the other. This is pretty much spot on, honestly. There was a famous incident in 1550 when Mary attended court for Christmas that year, and Edward, unhappy over his Catholic sister refusing to obey his religious laws, publicly reprimanded her. I do hope we get this scene in the show. I'm not sure if we'll get to her reign, but Mary is often hard done by in films and series, the only one coming close to a balanced view of her life being Elizabeth R, so I do have some hope this series might change that. Please don't disappoint me. Stephen Gardiner is played in this series by Alex McQueen, the actor you see on screen. Now, the historical Gardiner was in his late 60s and was the Bishop of Winchester, having been a prominent member of Henry VIII's council, but, as a firm Catholic, was eventually forced from the council and ended up in the Tower. I don't know why they've gone for a much younger actor for Gardner, and it is one of the few casting decisions that I'm not sure if I agree with. Time will tell, though. Here, we have a shot of Bella Ramsey in costume as Lady Jane Grey, having a chat with Tom Cullen between shots. I was actually quite pleased when I found out she had been cast as Jane, since she was pretty good in Game of Thrones from what I remember, and has a good chance of being the best actress to ever play Jane. Admittedly, her only competition is Nova Pilbeam and Helen Bonham Carter, both from fairly fictitious versions of her life, but hey-ho. Now, whilst we do have a fair few of Jane's letters and primary accounts of her personality and beliefs, there's nothing very firm about what she physically looked like. There was an account by a Genoese merchant describing her appearance in great detail, but more modern research has revealed this to have been completely made up by a man called Richard Davey in the late Victorian period. The only actual contemporary sources that mention her appearance come from a handful of letters, the best examples being those sent by a member of the Venetian embassy, but they are a little vague, saying things like, "The firstborn daughter of the Duchess of Suffolk is a pretty and comely young lady of beautiful intellect, letters, and praiseworthy habits named Jane." Other sources are equally as vague, but stress her intellect and devout faith. In terms of portraiture, there is one possible contender. The so-called Streatham portrait is most likely a much later copy, dating from the 1590s to 1600s, and it is not in great condition. We will never know if this is actually a copy of a contemporary portrait of Jane, or if someone in the late 16th century made her appearance up, but this is probably the nearest we will get to knowing what she looked like. As can be seen here, the production has tried to emulate the Streatham portrait. We have here a fairly similar coloured red gown and a red and white French hood. A behind-the-scenes picture, taken back in January, gives us a slightly better look from the front. The outfit is lacking a lot of the jewels seen in the Streatham portrait, and the collar is more white, but I expect this was changed for budget purposes. Or, possibly, they wanted to make Jane look a bit less opulent before the events of the 9 days, so she might have more jewels and so on then. Bella Ramsey does have much darker hair than Jane does in the Streatham portrait, and we do know Jane's sisters Catherine and Mary had quite light red hair, but we will never know for sure with Jane, and I don't think it looks too far off. Physically, she's a pretty decent match for the portrait, and again, I think she will be a good Jane, scripts depending. On that front, the only concerning thing I have come across is the character description. Ramsey is Jane Grey. Lady Jane is brought under Catherine and Thomas's wing, as part of their and her father's plan to marry her to the king. Young, serious, clever, and staunchly Protestant, she has a clear sense of her own place in the world, as near to the throne as she can get without sitting in the king's lap, although then again. Now, the first half of that is pretty decent and accurate. It is the second half that worries me, with comments about her sitting in the king's lap, which I pray are not implying that she is going to try and flirt with him or something.
ほれ、お前の番。
In reality, Edward barely mentions Jane in his journal. In fact, the only time Edward references her is in 1551, when Mary of Guise visited the English court on her way to Scotland, and Jane was appointed as part of the group of lords and ladies sent to welcome her. Whilst I do not doubt that Jane's parents and Thomas Seymour were plotting to arrange a match for her with the king, there is no real firm evidence that Jane and Edward themselves were keen to marry, nor that they knew each other as close friends. However, I think overall they will be staying pretty close to Jane's religious, intellectual, and independent character, and, since we know Bella Ramsey can play a pretty good authority figure, I'm sure she will be a great Jane. Of course, it doesn't go too well for Jane historically, so I wonder if we will get to see her execution, or if that will be in the second season. More on the second season theory later in the video. There is a very brief shot of Robert Dudley, played by Jamie Blackley. Robert was the second son of the Earl of Warwick, not the first, as the casting announcement claims, since Ambrose was definitely the eldest. Of course, Robert would be famous later when, during Elizabeth's reign, he would be made Earl of Leicester and enjoy the Queen's favour, with rumours flying around that Elizabeth was hoping to marry him. Not announced in this video, but something that has been confirmed. is that Ruby Ashbourne-Circus will be playing Amy Robsart, the wife of Robert Dudley, whose suspicious death in 1561 caused a great scandal at court. I imagine we will get to that part though in a later season or something. Robert here is missing his beard and so on, but since this is his younger years, I think I'm fine with him being clean-shaven for the moment. He is wearing an earring though, which is accurate to the famous portrait we have of him, but, as I have said a few times now, we won't know fully until the series is out. I can't quite see for sure, but I think this is Elizabeth being brought before the council and the king himself, and seems to fit in with that earlier scene with Catherine Parr being present as well, making me wonder what will happen. Will this be some sort of fictional scene where the stuff Thomas Seymour has been doing gets brought up? If so, that did not come out until after Catherine's death in 1548, so hopefully not. Maybe it could be something to do with the financial situation of Catherine's household, perhaps. I haven't got any more info than what we see on screen here, so it'll be interesting to find out what happens. The rest of the video is more shots of the actors promoting it between filming, and there are no more of them in costume or anything, so we will end that section here. Now I will go into the more general points about plot, predictions, or other stuff I perhaps didn't cover earlier. As I have mentioned, I do have some concerns with the plot summaries that we have seen thus far. The original announcement from Starz back in late 2019 said this: Elizabeth struggles to control her own destiny and takes real power as the men around her attempt to claim her sovereignty. Her fascinating and factual journey to secure the crown is filled with scheming, betrayal, and illicit relationships that threaten to bring forth her demise at a time in which every man or woman of the court is on the wheel of fortune, which may take them to a position of great power one moment, or the executioner's block the next. At the time, I reacted quite negatively to this, and even though I was perhaps a bit harsh in retrospect, some of my criticisms still stand, particularly the illicit relationships part, which I pray is not referring to the whole situation with Thomas Seymour. My main worry being that they will shift the blame onto Elizabeth for this, and, coupled with the fact that the actress playing her is nearly twice the age of the real-life Elizabeth at this point in her life, will make her look guilty. The updated casting announcement recently still says that the series will look at how the orphaned teenager, Elizabeth, gets embroiled in the political and sexual politics of the English court. Again, a worrying plot summary for me, as well as the comment about Jane sitting in Edward's lap. However, I think a lot of my other initial fears were based off of my experience with the Philippa Gregory trilogy, which had different writers, and took little to no care with the history, authenticity, and so on. Here, it looks like they have done a very good job overall with casting and authenticity. Romola Garai, Bella Ramsey, and Jessica Raine look absolutely perfect in their respective roles, and only Elizabeth and Gardner, in particular the latter, are the only ones that feel a bit off. That is a good sign. Even if we have problems with the plot, maybe the authenticity might be able to make up for some of it. Costume-wise, they've apparently been advised by the Tudor tailor, who even lent them some of the French hoods. Of course, fashions fluctuated and varied from person to person, even within the time span of this series. For example, following the visit of Mary of Guise in 1551, everyone at court started to adopt different styles of outfits based off what the French were wearing, with the exception of a few people like Elizabeth. This will probably be a difficult thing to show, though, due to the budget, so I am happy as long as it is mostly authentic and, save for a few hoods on some extras in the background here and there, I think they have made a decent attempt from the stuff we've got so far. I now have the opinion that there will be more than one season of Becoming Elizabeth. The series is only going to be made up of 8 55-minute-ish episodes, which, personally, I think is not enough time to cover the entire reigns of Edward VI and Mary I. I do go into this in the unscripted videos, but other behind-the-scenes stuff suggests that we are getting Seymour's fall from power and some sort of military conflict, possibly Kett's rebellion in 1549, since a hanging scene similar to his death has been filmed. Recently, some pictures emerged showing Mary riding on a horse wearing a more regal gown and accompanied by a large mounted escort, with Jane apparently being involved in the scene, making me think this is Mary riding to the Tower in preparation for her coronation, possibly having some sort of scene where she meets Jane after the events of the 9 days. I haven't seen anything leaking about events much beyond that, making me think we will be getting Mary's early reign, Wyatt's rebellion, Jane's execution, etc. in a second season. This would probably be the better course of action if you want to fully flesh out this time period, since that was definitely one of the weaknesses of the Lion's Cub episode of Elizabeth R, where the entire period I have described was crammed into an hour and a half. However, since Jane is going to be fairly prominent, and the casting announcement does mention her father's ambition, not to mention Guildford Dudley has also been cast as well, we might be going a little bit into Mary's reign perhaps. Since, as I mentioned, an actress has also been cast as Amy Robsart, it would seem probable that they will be going at least a little bit into Elizabeth's reign at some point in the future to cover the suspicious death of Amy Robsart. So, again, I think it will be a season 1 ending with either the death of Edward and Mary's accession in mid-1553, or the beheading of Lady Jane Grey in early 1554, and the second season covering the events after that, up until the early 1560s, with the initial stages of Elizabeth's early reign. Time will tell, though, if that is how the series will play out. Overall, then, whilst I do still have some concerns over the plot, and have not forgiven Stars at all for the abomination that was the Philippa Gregory trilogy, this one is shaping up to be authentic at least. I think they have done a pretty decent job with the casting, and they've clearly put some effort into getting the period to look accurate, taking advice from the experts in terms of costumes and, overall, giving us a good picture of what this time period would have looked like, which is very important when making a period piece, if you want to fully immerse your audience in the world you are trying to build. Since we've had nothing but Tudor dramas of late, finally, we might be getting something that may restore my shattered hope just a little bit. Although, being a wary veteran of bad Tudor dramas, I will remain skeptical until we get the final product. In the meantime, this has been the Laughing Cavalier, wishing you a good day.